とりあえずモリソン先生、続き、ではお願いします。
Mute 解除で。Hello? Can you hear me? Can somebody let me know if... Hello? あれさっきの眠さ。
聞こえてます。大丈夫です。
Okay. I was asked to give this in English, so I'm going to explain my system for the on-demand class in English. It shouldn't take more than 10 minutes or so. And it's basic. I was reading recently Aristotle's Poetics, and in Aristotle's Poetics, he talks about monarchy. And he says that monarchy, namely rule by one person, is the best kind of government. However, it's the easiest to screw up and to do poorly. So he ends up not recommending it. But I thought that might be a good metaphor for thinking about on demand. So if you do it correctly, if you do it effectively, it can be the best system for teaching students at a university level. However, it's very easy to do it in a bad way. So I was going to explain 8 necessary conditions in order to make your on-demand lessons effective and high quality. Okay, so it's very easy to conduct it in a poor way. And what do I mean by that? I mean basically the instructor turns on his video camera, records a video of himself talking or herself talking for 90 minutes, and then gives it to the kids. And the kids just kind of watch it passively, and they don't engage with anything. And that's sort of the tendency with on-demand, one of the negative tendencies. So in order to avoid that, I've come up with a kind of system so that the students not only listen to the 90-minute video from the professor, but also engage with the texts that they're assigned and use all kinds of other materials for the assignments. Okay, so it's not passive, it's active. Okay, so now on to the 8 necessary conditions. Okay, the first condition is on the first day, I give students a handout that has all of the literary. My specialty is literature, Japanese literature, mainly modern stuff, but we also delve into the pre-modern and earlier modern past as well. But we talk about literature. So in order to talk about literature, you have to have some basic knowledge of literary terminology. So on the very first day, I give them this sheet called 13 Things to Consider When Reading Narrative. その物語小説を読むときに留意すべき13の重要事項. And we go over this on the very first day so that they know all of the things that they should be thinking about as they read the text. And I think I have a video of that where I explain the 13 things to think about when reading a literary work on my YouTube channel. So if anybody is interested and wants to see how I actually go about conducting my classes, you can do a Google search for Professor Morrison, and then just put in maybe Natsume Soseki in Romaji, and it should come up first. And you can follow my channel if you want and see what kind of materials I teach in class. And I would say about 20 or 30% of all of my materials are on that channel. There's a lot of stuff that I have not uploaded it, but in all, over the past 2 years, I've made about 100 videos for 100 literary works. And then I do commentary on the videos and provide materials for all those. So the first thing is to give students these basic terminology for thinking about the text. And these include just basic terms like katarite, like 信用できるかできないかとか. I don't need to go over the whole list, but basic things about images, metaphors, and so forth that students will need to use and keep in the back of their head as they're reading each of the stories for the class. So that's 1. 2, the second necessary condition is that I teach one short story, a tanpen shosetsu, each week. Occasionally we do poetry too, but it's basically one sakuhin per week. Okay, so when I teach taimen jugyo, the old style of meeting with the students, we are not able to go at such a rapid pace. So on demand enables me to do one story for each week. So students end up learning or studying about 15 literary works for the entire semester. Okay, and how do I distribute the stories to the students? I use Google Classroom, and on Google Classroom, I upload the story, a PDF file of the original Japanese version. For example, Natsume Souseki Yume Juya is what we did a few weeks ago. So Yume Juya in the Japanese PDF file, the English translation of that, which is also in PDF. And then I give them, this moves me on to the third necessary condition. You can't just give the students the text itself, the story itself. You have to provide some kind of study guide. So for all of the stories that I teach in my classes, I've made accompanying study guides for all of these. And the study guides have questions about the text that force the students to think deeply about what is happening in the stories. So the third part is the study guides. For example, for Natsume Souseki Yume Juya, I've made a study guide here. Can't see it, but the study guide is all in English. The first handout was the Japanese and English version. So some of the materials I do in both Japanese and English. For the study guides, most of them are mainly entirely in English. And it provides some basic background about the story. For example, Yume Juya is written in the late Meiji period. Students usually don't know anything about Meiji or Taisho or Showa or Edo period, so I give some basic information about that, some basic information about Natsume Souseki, the writer, and then we delve into the text with 7 questions that I explain in the video. Okay, and I run through the questions, so students are not just listening to me talk about the study guide without anything in front of them. Rather, they have the study guide in front of them, so they're following along as I explain in the on-demand video. And they're able to slow the speed down if they need to. So if I'm speaking too fast, they can slow it down. If they didn't understand, if they only understood maybe 40, 50% on the first listen, they can listen again and again as many times as it takes. They can also push the CC button, which is on the YouTube channel, which gives you fairly accurate, as long as I'm speaking clearly, fairly accurate jidou jimaku, the automatic subtitles for my videos too, so they can follow along with the sentences, write down words that I'm using that they don't know, and make notes of all this. And so in the video, I will go through all of the information, background information, and then the 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 questions about the story about Yume Juya. And these questions force them to think very deeply about the text. And then I also introduce relevant literary terms when necessary. What is an allegory, for example? Several of the stories in Yume Juya are allegories. So I give examples of allegories, explain what an allegory is, so that by the end of the second week, they already have an understanding of literary terminology, both in Japanese and in English, and some of the basic tools that are needed to read the text. And in my classes, I always emphasize that sort of subjective emotional reactions and responses to these works of art is important, but that's not what that's not the goal of a literary class. We need to have tools in our head and in the back of our mind all the time in order to give arguments about the work. Okay, so that's the third one, study guide, which is very important. So each week has its own study guide for its own literary work. And again, I've made about 100 videos for 100 different literary works, so I mix it up so that there's no overlap between the classes and so forth. And some of the classes, for example, my Higashi Asia to Nihon Bunka class focuses more on, it's more sort of Sinitically oriented. So there's a lot of stuff that involves China and Chinese tradition and so forth. And we delve more into the past in this class, whereas the Honyaku to Monogatari Riron focuses more on post-Meiji stuff with a lot of Gendai Bungaku as well in that class. All right, so that's the video. Okay, the fourth necessary condition is video commentary, which I just basically explained, where I explain all of the important things that they need to think about from the study guide. That's fourth. Number 5, I don't always do this, but I sometimes provide recitations, so a reading of the full English translation. So if you want to look on Natsume Souseki Yume Juya, I think I did a video where I read Professor Bordausch's English translation of the entire work. So students can read, first they read the original, of course, because they're Japanese and they understand the original better. So they read Yume Juya, not by Natsume Souseki, in the original. And once they have the story in their head and they understand all the details, then they read the English translation. And this is a very important point. This is how I learned Japanese when I first started studying when I was 21 years old. I would read Yukiguni, for example, in Side and Sticker's translation, and then go to the Genbun and struggle with the Genbun. So students are able to do that. And then after they have read the English translations, then they can go to my recitation video, my dodoku video, and listen to that as well while they follow along with their text that they have in front of them, because they print out each of the PDF files and look at it, and they write in definitions of words they don't know and little comments in the margins, and then they end up turning those in at the end of the semester. And I'll explain later what students actually turn in at the end of the semester. Okay, so that's the recitation videos, which are very helpful for students. I did a few recitation videos in Japanese, but since I'm not a Japanese speaker, there's no point in doing that. And there are many recitations that are on YouTube, for example, of Hagiwara Sakutaro's Neko Machi, for example, we read a few weeks ago, that is read by some native Japanese speaker that's online. So I encourage students to use those as well for each story. Okay, and then student assignments. So this is at the end of the semester. So basically I should brag a little bit that I rarely have students come into class or into my own on-demand sessions without having read the story. So they always read the story in advance. And how do I know that? Because if they hadn't read the story, they wouldn't be able to answer the questions on the study guide, and the questions are all submitted. The answers to the questions are all submitted at the end of the semester, and I immediately know if anybody has not read the story. It's immediately apparent if a student has read the story and thought deeply about the questions on my study guide. And so in my experience, 99% have actually read the story, thought about it deeply, and written their responses. So this is very important. Well, I think the biggest fault of a lot of other professors is to not really care or not really check whether the students are actually reading the stories. So it's very important that you force them to read the stories. And the ones who don't have any interest in reading the stories, they drop out by the first week or second week of the class. They quit the class altogether. Those students who quit the classes are very few in number, of course, but occasionally it happens. But 99% of the students who sign up for the class stay through the class and read all of the stories, both in the original Japanese, in the translation, English translation, and with my study guide questions, follow along in English. And as for their assignments, I always tell them they can write in English or in Japanese. If they write in English, they don't get any extra points. Write in whatever language feels more natural, is easier for you to think and write clearly in. And so invariably, well, not invariably, but about 90% of the time, the students write their final, their study questions and their final essays, which I'll explain in a second, in Japanese in most cases. So I have to grade their essays in Japanese and so forth, but it's, so yeah, student assignments. So at the end of the semester, they turn in their study and their questions to my study, their answers to my study questions at the end of the semester for each, or at least half. I vary it up actually. So sometimes they'll turn in answers to 6 of the 15 stories that were assigned, or 7 of the stories, 15 stories that are assigned during the semester. But they turn in that, so their answers to the study questions, and they also have to turn in a final end of the semester sakuhin ron, a short ronbun, a short essay about one of the works that we read in the class. And I should also mention too that on their answers to the study guide questions, which they turn in, they also are required to turn in vocabulary lists. So they're reading the English translation of, say, Natsume Soseki's Yume Juya, and there's a lot of words that come up that they don't know, and they have to write those words down. They write the definitions down either in English or Japanese, and these lists add up with time, so that at the end of the semester, they turn in that list of all these new words that they learned as well, along with their answers to the study questions. And again, if you go to my YouTube channel and look, for example, at the Yume Juya Natsume Soseki commentary that I gave, there's links that I give in the descriptions to each video that direct you to the study guide. So you can actually see many of the study guides that I've made and sort of get a better idea of what I'm talking about right now. Okay, so that's student assignment 1 is the answers to the study guide plus vocabulary, words that they didn't know. And then the other half of the final assignment is their student essay, the shouronbun. And it's very important did I give the students at the beginning of the semester a video link to a video that I made a year ago called 小論文の書き方についての説明について or something like that. And that is on my YouTube channel as well. You can look at it. It's already received several thousand, I think, if I remember correctly, views. It's a very popular video, and I just basically explain the basics of writing a shōronbun. I explain that a shōronbun, or sort of analytic essay about a work of literature, is not a kansobun. There's a tendency among especially enough students in the beginning to write kansobun, and I tell them repeatedly, kansobun is for elementary students. They should have gotten over that phase in high school, but most haven't. So I teach them the basics of doing bunseki and kaishaku rather than kanso suru koto. And final essay, so they watch the how to write an essay video. They read the materials that I give them about how to write an essay video. And the most important things for writing a sakuhin ron are having a strong shicho, thesis sentence. I tell them that the shicho is the sort of meat or the bone of the essay that they're writing. And that if anybody turns in an essay at the end of the semester that doesn't have a strong thesis, that is making an argument for something, then I will dock points and they won't receive a good grade. So you can look at that video if you want on your own later. It's a very helpful video for the students, and the sheets, the accompanying shirio for that as well. And then students turn in these final assignments. And I must say that since we entered the Corona period, that the quality of final assignments and the quality of the final essays has actually gone up, because I think students are more focused. They can read the stories at their own pace. They can listen to my lectures in English repeatedly, whereas in Taimen Jugyo, I usually end up explaining things bengijo de, just for sake of convenience. I end up explaining most things in Japanese. So when I teach students directly, they speak to me in Japanese. I explain everything in Japanese, even though we're using materials that are in English. Their reading ability is not that great in a lot of cases, although some are very good actually. But I end up using more Japanese than English. However, with on demand, I end up using English more often, just because I can make more material and think more clearly, I guess, if it's in my own native language of English. Okay, so the students, the quality of their assignments has improved over the last 3 years. They're able to study and read and do the assignments at their own pace. They can watch the videos repeatedly, as I just said, and they can sort of think more deeply about the texts that we read in the classes. And I didn't mention translation, but translation is, of course, a very big theme in all my classes, since we're reading the original Japanese as well as the English translations. So they're getting a first-hand experience, usually for the first time in their lives, of what it means to translate, right? So they're looking at this original and they're looking at the translation. They're saying that everything doesn't match up completely word by word, and they're realizing that there's different methods of translation, the naturalization or domestication method, and then there's also the what is it, alienation or whatever it's called. I forget the terminology right now, but they get firsthand experience about translation. And I also give them the option sometimes, not in all my classes, but I occasionally give my students the option of, instead of writing the final shōronbun essay, I say, if you want to do a translation of your own of a previously untranslated literary work, you can do that too. So some students choose to find a work that has not yet been translated into Japanese, or occasionally into English, the other way around. Some students want to try to write something, translate something from Japanese into English, but usually it's into their native language from English to Japanese. And then they write their translation and submit that along with a final kind of one-page sort of summary of the problems they encountered while translating, and a sort of brief explanation of their own philosophy of translation that they developed in the class. Okay, so that's sort of the alternative final assignment for students who would rather do a translation instead of a shōronbun. But I usually emphasize and encourage the students to do a shōronbun, because if there's one thing that every student must learn when they enter university, it's to get to university, it's to learn how to read carefully and how to analyze texts and stories or whatever it might be, ronbun or whatever it might be, carefully, to understand it, to learn how to interpret, and to learn how to write a short essay of analysis that uses all of the standard and universal, I should mention. This is another important point, that the format that I give them for writing their shōronbun is basically the universal format at this moment. So if they go to England to study at some point, they will already know the format, the structure, and what is required of a literary essay before they go, because it's basically the same format that is used around the world everywhere these days. So that's probably the most important thing that they can learn while at university, in addition to improving their language skills and to increasing knowledge of the world and so forth. But it's this kind of discipline of learning how to convey your ideas clearly in a essay format. Okay, so those are the 8. Oh, then finally, number 8 of the necessary conditions is supplementary video. So occasionally we'll teach a work that has lots of Buddhist elements. So there's a Buddhist video I made. See, we have a comment from somebody there. A Buddhist, an introduction to Buddhist thought, kind of the basics of Buddhism. And it's about a 50-minute video. I made it in Japanese. And I give this to students as a kind of hosoku, as a supplementary video, because a lot of them don't know the first thing about Buddhism. So in order to understand and interpret this story we're reading, you should at least know the basics of what rinne is, of what bonno is, and of what these basic sort of categories of Buddhist thought are. So I make supplementary videos as well and give these to the students throughout the course of the semester. If anybody wants to look at that video, that's also on my YouTube channel. It's called I forget the title. 仏教基礎概念。仏教の基礎概念の入門みたいなタイトルで。Forget what it is, but if you go to my channel and look up 仏教, it should come up immediately. So the supplementary videos are also very important. So back to my original point, if you do not follow these principles and do not follow these conditions, it will be a terrible class and it will not go well. But if you do follow these conditions, just as Aristotle said that monarchy is the best form of government if you do it perfectly. However, it's very, very difficult to do it perfectly. Therefore, we should get rid of it altogether. But in the case of on-demand lessons, if you do it perfectly and follow all of these 8 conditions, students actually like this more. And they prefer this, and they don't have to rush to campus at 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever when they leave their houses. They can do it all from home. And so my final thoughts, the quality of assignments, the quality of their kimatsu kadai has improved. It's gone up, both essays and their answers to the study guide questions that I give them. And also the student evaluations, I mean, mine have always been good naturally, but I think they're even better now. And students have more free time to, not free time, but students can read the text when they want. Some prefer to read the story late at night and follow my videos at night and do their thinking late at night. Others can do it in the morning when their brains are fresh. They can do it whenever they want. And I didn't mention this, but this is another very, very important thing. If it were just this, it would probably not go well. But I use Google Classroom. All of my directions to the students are in Japanese. This is very important. If I gave instructions about what to do this week and what to follow and what to think about while reading this text, if I gave it in English, there'd be a lot of misunderstandings. So I write in very, very clear, easy to understand Japanese that does not give any kind of rise to misunderstandings, so that they're able to follow along each week and do the assignments. And when they have a question, students will ask their question on Google Classrooms on the site that I make, so that all the other students can see their questions as well. So usually when a student has a question about this week's assignment or something, that question is usually also in the heads of the other students. So they'll ask them, on behalf of the others too. So I see the question, I immediately respond on Google Classroom to their question in Japanese, and then all the misunderstandings or potential misunderstandings are resolved from the get-go. So that's a very important thing. So obviously the professors who only use English in class will have a different method. So I shouldn't say this is the only way to do things, but it is the only way for me to do things. And I would highly recommend it for others who teach bilingually in their class. In my classes, we use English and Japanese, of course. So this method is very effective, and I've kind of formed this method or kind of honed it or polished this method over the course of teaching for the last 10 years or so. All the assignments, and those are all the points. Okay, so to recap very briefly, it's on demand, if done poorly, is the worst of all the available systems. If done properly, it is the best of all the available and possible systems. Okay, as long as you follow these 8 conditions that I just explained. All right, I'm sure some of you will have questions for me. I will answer to the best of my ability, but that is all for now. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
森田先生、ありがとうございました。質問は、また、最後にまとめてということで、それでは、次は斉藤先生、お願いします。